Hey everybody, welcome back to my jewelry bench. Today we're going to look at this beautiful vintage Bulova chrono. This is a model 14EB. It's got some issues. Looks like it took a good drop on the floor. Pretty easy to do down here in Florida because almost all the floors have tile on them. And you drop a watch on tile floor, well, things don't always go so well. Looks like the customer who brought this in found a little part floating around in there, and that part is what I'm guessing the reset spring on the chronograph. The watch is not working. It's got a couple little floaters inside. Looks like when it took a drop, looks like the luminescent lines came off a couple of the indicators, so we're going to put those back on. Let's get this opened up. I appreciate somebody pre-opening these for me. This was a pretty tough watch to open. Let's look inside. So we've got a complicated chrono. Looks like 1950s-ish. I'm going to go look that up. The movement is in pretty good shape. It's clean inside. The watch did work before this incident. If we look at the start-stop switch, you can see everything does kind of work well. It does switch into its current start and stop position, but the reset doesn't work at all. So when I push that reset button, it should reset the hands back to the 0 position and put the chronograph complication back into a 0 set. We can do that manually just by adjusting this lever. And look at this movement. So we've got some other issues. This watch is fully wound. It's not winding anymore. It's not an automatic, so it has no slip spring. And if I look at the balance, you can see it's a little bit loose. And I'm guessing it's loose because the balance cock is pretty loose on this. Looks like when it took a drop, the screw kind of slipped out of position. So we have to go through and figure out exactly what happened. And that's looking at this under a microscope, we can see exactly what's going on. I'm going to zoom in here and show you. It looks like the screw that holds that reset spring in position. Looks like the head broke. There's two reasons that happens. Typically a drop or somebody being a little too aggressive when they're tightening up the screw. So I always tell you to be careful when you're putting those screws in because they will break easy. So this is the reset spring. We're going to put that back in. First thing we got to do is get that old screw out. Luckily, it wasn't tightened down too tightly or too deep, and we can get this screw out relatively easy. It's not always the case. A lot of times I'll have to kind of drill in a little bit and loosen them up. But this one's coming out just with a light touch of a screwdriver. So we're going to take that completely out of the movement. And the problem that I anticipate having is that somewhere in this watch is the head for that screw. And hopefully we can get it out of there. It comes out easy, so I don't have to disassemble the whole movement to try to find out where it slipped. So there's the screw part of it, and we'll go on this hunt for the head. We'll put that aside for now, and I've already found a screw for this, so we've got a new screw to go back in there. Let's just kind of play around here and see why this movement's not running. So we've got a pretty loose balance. What I found was the screw was almost completely undone on the balance cock, so we're going to just kind of make that slip in there and give it a quick tighten up, see if the watch moves again. And here you can see once I tightened up that balance screw or that balance cock screw, everything went back to working properly. The watch does time pretty well. It looks like it's been serviced within 10 years. It's running well. I don't see a reason to go ahead and service this. It's keeping pretty good time. We're just going to make sure that that's nice and tight. The watch keeps on running. Now I can go ahead and actually test the chronograph. And if you didn't notice, when I flipped it over, the screw had popped out, so I'll show you that in a little bit. So we're looking at this movement here. You can see once I press the start-stop button, the watch does start and stop properly. The reset button, however, of course, because that spring's not attached, is not resetting the movement back to the 0 position. Let's go ahead and get our new screw. And we'll put that aside. I've already tested it. It fits and tightens up pretty well. So now we got that screw put aside. We're going to put the reset spring back in position. Now this lever here, when you push the reset button, it actually resets the chronograph dials. There's two hands, and it resets those back to 0. So once we've got that in position, we can place our new screw and then tighten it up. Again, when you're tightening up these screws on any watch, you do want to be careful. Those heads are very thin, and if you aren't careful, if you tighten them too much, you'll break those heads off. That's typically how I see, some of these screws break. I've done it too. You get an old watch with some old fatigued screws, they will break pretty easily, and if they drop, especially on an older watch, those screws are brittle and the heads will pop off, and you end up with some floaters floating around inside the watch. So now you can see I'm going to do the start-stop function, and then we'll perform a reset, and it resets the hands back to 0 position. So we'll just take a look at that from the front, and it looks like we're all back in working condition so far. Again, we've got a few more things to do, but one of the things I want to check, obviously, is that the watch runs properly. So we're going to start the stopwatch part of this watch, and we're going to let it run and make sure that we advance the minute indicator for the chronograph. So we push that around, and you can see it didn't quite make it. So we're going to go ahead and adjust that one more time, just to see if it works any better. So I'm advancing it and letting it go a full 2-minute indicator. When we get back to the 0 position on the large hand, that minute indicator on the chrono to the right should plop over, and that time it did. So I'm guessing it's probably just a little dry on that wheel. So what we're going to do is just put a little dab of oil on that pivot point. That pivot point does not have a jewel on it, so we're going to put a little oil on there and just wipe off the excess, and then we're going to make sure it's reset. We'll give it a shot one more time. So again, I'll start the chronograph. Once I start it, I'm going to let it run for a full minute and see if the minute indicator on the right side advances to the first minute. And here you can see I'm pointing to the minute indicator, and it snaps into place perfectly. So that jewel, or that pivot point, was just a little bit dry. Now I'm going to go ahead and fix the 2 missing or floaters in there from the luminescent indicators. So we're going to take the stem and crown out, and we're going to remove the case screws and clamps to remove the movement from the case. We'll do the first one, and then we'll move on to the second one. This watch has 2 case screws holding it in position. And once those are put aside, we can actually decase the movement. You can see one of the indicators actually popped out. Glad we got all the little floaters out of this. I probably should have stopped the chronograph when I was doing this. What I'm going to do is put a little crystal cement on those, and I'm going to glue those back into position. That'll hold them in place and keep them there for a good long time. Crystal cement is a wonderful product. It works good with watches. You got to be careful with it. Don't get it on the dial. Once you get those indicators back in, you can go ahead and case up the watch movement, and that's what we're doing here. We're just putting it back in the proper position. Before I actually put the case screws in, first thing I'll do is put the stem and crown back into the movement. So here you can see I'm pushing that back in. I'm also going to put the push the clutch release button while I push the stem into the proper position. It's only a 1-position clutch, so it only winds in 1 position, and the second position is just the setting position. Now we'll get those case clamps back in. Once we get the case clamps in, we'll get the screw in that. Try to do this over the camera. Get a little bit better with this new camera. I hope you guys like the video quality. So I'll tighten up that first clamp. I don't tighten them up all the way sometimes. I think in this case it should be a little loose so I can get access or a little easier placement of the second case clamp. And we'll tighten that screw down, then we'll make sure both of them are tight. That will hold the movement in the watch perfectly. So once that's done, we can go back and retest the watch one more time. I found the head that was floating around. Obviously, it came out of the watch when I flipped the movement over. And there's the broken part of the screw. And you can see those are what caused some of the issues. Obviously, from a drop, this watch had to have taken a drop for those 2 things to happen. I'll let the watch run, and we'll go ahead and just test it for a little while, make sure it's running good and keeping good time and everything works well. I hope you liked this video, guys. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. And if you know anybody who's interested in this kind of thing, please share this video with them. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.